How's it going, everybody? So in this video, we're going to be discussing the science of fiber and the nuances and misunderstandings that a lot of times go unnoticed, especially within mainstream nutrition science and mainstream nutrition recommendations, and especially the common paradigms that most of the average population tend to buy into. We're going to be discussing the science behind why a lot of that might not be entirely accurate, and there's a lot of missing information. So before I even begin, I want to begin with the caveat or with the preference that I personally do not take a extremist stance on fiber or on plant foods or anything like that. I'm not a dogmatic carnivore guru or anything like that. I personally don't think that, I do not think that plants are poisonous. I don't think that fiber is the devil or anything crazy like that. However, what I do believe personally, not scientifically, not professionally, but personally, I believe that, well, I guess scientifically, yes, I believe that fiber is not essential for health, and it is not essential for healthy bowel function. And in this video, you're going to understand the science behind this opinion, okay? Now, if you want to eat fibrous foods, then there's nothing wrong with that, provided these fibrous foods are not unintentionally triggering digestive discomfort or autoimmune illness or anything like that. And that's the reason why I'm making this video and why I often speak out on the unnecessary component of fiber in the diet. It's because myself personally, I was suffering from psoriasis, irritable bowel syndrome, and some terrible disease states that doctors couldn't help me with. They had no clue what was going on. They told me I was perfectly healthy even though I wasn't. And for me, just by removing certain types of fibers in my diet, mostly beans, nuts, and seeds, and whole grains, I completely resolved my health issues. And so my stance is that specific individuals might have specific intolerances to specific groups of foods, particularly foods that are high in fiber, that can be triggering issues that most people wouldn't even suspect are being triggered by foods. And some people, they might just feel general feelings of malaise and lethargy, and not even realize they have a problem until they identify these triggers, right? So anyway, if you enjoy fibrous foods, eat them. But do not think that you need to eat fiber for healthy bowel movements, for a healthy gut microbiome, which is not a scientific term at all. Or to be healthy or anything like that. Don't think by consciously adding more fiber to your diet, you're going to be helping yourself until after you've watched this video, okay? All right, so let's get into it. So I actually have an outline for this video, luckily, to keep me from going on crazy tangents and rants. All right, so fiber is, well, let's start with the definition of fiber. What is fiber exactly? So by definition, fiber is essentially any kind of food or consumable or whatnot that cannot be broken down and digested by the human digestive tract, okay? It's basically undigested matter, okay, that passes through your intestine undigested. So this is actually the reason why it is easy to assume that fiber improves your bowel movements, because by definition, all fiber is undigested matter, and this can include collagen, certain collagenous or harder substances from animal foods, actually, as well as fiber in plant foods, structural matter like cellulose, for example. Cellulose is a primary structural compound found in most plants that herbivorous and even omnivorous animals can actually break down because they have the cellulase enzyme to do so. But humans, we can't digest cellulose. we pass it completely undigested. And so this bulks up and adds volume to your fecal matter, as well as increases the frequency. Obviously, the more undigested matter that you consume on a daily basis, the more frequently you'll pass bowel movements, and the larger in volume those will be. More undigested matter going through your intestine, more bowel movements because they're undigested, right? But the problem is this doesn't necessarily mean that this isn't necessarily a healthy thing per se. Just because you're pooping more often and at higher volumes, it doesn't mean that it's healthy. People believe that because that's what they're told. And because, it's kind of like magic, right? You eat more leafy greens and fibrous whole grains and stuff, and you get more bloating or, whatever. You get more volume, gianter poops, basically, right? All right, anyway, let's continue, okay? So if you eat less fiber, you're going to, especially a low fiber or a no fiber diet, you will by nature, by definition, have less bowel movements, less frequent bowel movements, and less volume of bowel movements overall. But that doesn't indicate a health problem. Constipation, by definition, is when you do have a lot of matter in your intestine that you cannot pass, right? So you have feelings of significant fullness in the intestine, but usually it's only a problem if you have pains and cramping and things like that, okay? So I don't want to get into too much detail, but I've actually, I don't want to get into too much detail, but there are some people out there that if they don't poop more than once a day or something, they automatically assume they have a problem and they hyperfixate on their intestine, and they basically develop hypochondria, where they're like, oh God, I have constipation and bowel problems and this and that. And they identify themselves as IBS. They self-diagnose as irritable bowel syndrome, even though they don't actually have a problem. And it's pretty bad because I actually had IBS, and it was directly caused by fiber, actually triggered by fiber. But the difference is I actually had a ton of undigested stuff that was causing irregularities in my bowel. So let's begin with the science. Let's get into the science now, okay? So large population studies, correlation studies, epidemiology and cohort studies that compare different groups of people with varying fiber intakes, they tend to show, on average, small improvements and risk reductions for diseases and all-cause mortality. So basically, the majority of the evidence on fiber intake, right? They take large groups of people, usually cohort studies. They have cohort 1, group 1, and cohort 2, group 2. And group 2, let's say, has very, very low fiber intake. They're eating mostly white rice, hamburgers with French fries and crap like that. Whatever. Candy, donuts, etc. They're eating mostly a refined food diet, very low in fiber. They're definitely not eating an all-meat diet, I can guarantee you that, because they're scared that they're going to get a nutrient deficiency if they do, even though they're basically not eating any nutrient-filled foods anyway, but, people are crazy. So, yeah, that's group 2. They're the refined food diet people, right, eating no fiber. Then you have group 1 eating the highest fiber intakes in the study. Now, typically, there's multiple groups in these studies with multiple fiber intakes, but we're going to compare the two extremes to demonstrate the point here of this video. So group 1, lots and lots of fiber, lots and lots of fiber. They're eating basically a plant-based diet, which is seen as the healthiest diet on the planet, right, by the general consensus, even though it's not. Lots and lots of fiber. Beans, nuts and seeds, spinach, kale, salads, you name it. Lots of fiber. So the low fiber group tends to have the worst health outcomes. They have increased rates of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, etc. But the high fiber group tends to have lower risks of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and all these things, and they tend to have a healthier weight as well. Okay. Now, this is the average findings, the results that you'll find in these studies is that on average, the groups with the lowest fiber intakes have the worst health outcomes, and the groups with the highest fiber intake have the best health and the lowest risk of disease. Now, the problem is when you take correlation studies like this and you extrapolate causation and say, well, the higher fiber group has better health outcomes because they're eating more fiber, and fiber causes all these health benefits. So there's a lot of claims that are made from these studies, like high fiber intakes reduces cholesterol levels, which doesn't really mean much, by the way. Reduces blood sugar levels and decreases your insulin or whatever. And it's anti-inflammatory, and fiber directly improves the heart health through all these functions and things. And then they use these really crazy mouse studies where they or petri dish studies where they'll take they'll isolate a human organ, right, like a liver cell or something, and they'll expose it to fiber intake or to some byproducts of the gut microbiome from fiber metabolism, and then they'll try to incur a physiological effect in a test tube in a lab from the metabolite of fiber, and then they'll find a mechanism from this isolated liver cell or some shit, and some abstract strain of bacteria produced from fiber metabolism, and then they'll point it back to, well, look, we decreased liver production or we decreased cholesterol production from this liver cell in this test tube study, and this helps to explain why the people who eat the most fiber have the lowest LDL cholesterol in these studies. The problem is, number one, the relative risk the relative risk reduction in these correlation studies makes it look like you have a dramatically high difference in disease outcomes from higher versus lower fiber intakes. But the absolute risk reduction, meaning absolute risk is the overall difference it'll actually make in the real world. Relative risk is just the differences between the two groups in the studies. But the absolute risk reduction is so small. Basically, what that means is the translation into the real world on a clinical basis in real everyday life is so small that it kind of makes these studies irrelevant in the first place. The findings that they don't really get a clinically significant difference very much at all. The magnitude effect is so small, these studies are basically worthless, okay? But it just depends on if they're talking about relative risk or absolute risk. But first of all, most average people, they don't even see the studies to begin with. They just see the headlines in the news outlets, or their favorite health guru will make an outrageous claim based on these studies. Or the news outlets will do tabloid things where it's alarmist, extremist headlines. Like, oh my God, just 5 grams of fiber a day and you can reverse heart disease forever, or prevent heart disease forever, or whatever. Or it'll reduce your risk by up to 30% of heart disease. And it's the studies don't actually say this. This is the problem. And then even if the average person was to read these studies, they wouldn't understand the difference between relative risk versus absolute risk, or the methodologies being used, or how to interpret these things. So basically, the differences in outcomes are very, very small from most of these studies. And healthy user bias, like we're saying, the groups, so even if it did show a significant enough difference in health outcomes in these studies, what you'll find is the groups who are eating the most fiber are eating very, very low refined foods by definition, by nature. Because the highest groups, we're talking 20 to 80 grams of fiber a day, usually on average 30 to 50 grams of fiber a day. I guarantee you most people trying to be healthy that you see in these gyms or eating so-called healthy diets are not even getting 50 grams of fiber a day, okay? To get the amount of fiber in the highest groups, the highest fiber groups in these studies, you have to be intentionally trying to prevent diseases and be healthy. So what I'm saying is the groups of people who are eating the most fiber in these studies are some of the most healthiest eaters you will find anywhere around. And what that means is not only are they eating more fiber, but they're probably exercising at the highest level of the majority of society. They're probably intentionally not eating refined sugars, refined carbs, and refined fats. And these refined foods that the highest fiber groups are not eating are also the exact foods that make up the majority of the calories in the low fiber groups in these studies, okay? And so basically, the reason why you see high fiber diets in these studies seem to lead to better health outcomes and low risk of disease, whereas low fiber does the opposite. It's because these people are eating less refined foods overall. And the problem is all these diseases that are said to be improved with high fiber intake, they're caused by these refined foods that the low fiber diets are eating. So the question is, does fiber intake cause better health outcomes, or does just the removal of these refined foods cause better health outcomes? Because, and this is important because if it's not the fiber that's causing these health benefits, and it's just a removal of refined foods, you could literally eat a lot of different diets and not have to worry about fiber and still experience these awesome health benefits. The great thing is this has actually been studied. Okay? So, here is the thing. Fiber itself has actually been studied in isolation in clinical trials. There have been many clinical trials done on supplementing isolated fiber supplements on top of people's regular diets. And what you'll typically, and we're talking about like Metamucil or just like psyllium husk or these fiber supplements, right? Or even like flaxseed and stuff like that. Typically, what you see in these studies where they take average people and you add more fiber to their diet, you'll see and we're talking anywhere from 15 to 30 grams of added fiber supplements per day on top of their regular diet. What you'll see is these studies generally show no noticeable benefits in blood sugar levels, cholesterol levels, subjective well-being, and very commonly actually result in bowel function irregularities, meaning a lot of times you'll find these people add more these fiber supplements in these clinical trials tend to get more constipation and oftentimes fluctuations between diarrhea and constipation as well as gas and bloating. Now it's true that your your stomach and digestive problem, your digestive system can adapt over time to varying levels of fiber intake. But a lot of people, this is actually another finding that we found that we've seen in people who habitually eat more fiber. There's been studies where they remove fiber in different amounts. And they find people that eat the most fiber typically report of the most constipation and bowel irregularities. Whereas people, as you gradually remove more and more fiber, if you're interested in the link to the study, let me know down in the comments. I'll send it to you. People with the least fiber intake in this fiber deprivation study actually have complete resolution of all bowel symptoms. So even people who are adapted to high fiber intakes might find a improvement in bowel function by removing fiber. But yeah, isolated fiber supplements. There's been a multitude of studies that have studied this. You actually don't see the health benefits that people commonly claim is due to fiber intake. And in fact, you often will see increased bowel irregularities. So does that mean that, fiber is bad for you? No. Because if fiber was bad, so a lot of these carnivore quacks, these people, these dogmatic people who will tell you that fiber is it'll kill you, or it's poisonous, or plant foods are deadly. That can't be true, because you see in these studies, the people with the highest fiber intakes, they have the best health outcomes. So just because fiber isn't necessarily causing their health benefits, or more plant foods, just because more plant foods aren't necessarily the cause of the better health outcomes, it doesn't mean that fibers or plant foods are bad. In fact, you would generally see worse health outcomes in people who are eating more plants in these studies if that was the case. So just remember that anytime someone tells you plant foods are deadly, why the hell do we not see the people who eat the most plants and fiber in their diets dropping dead or having worse health outcomes? We don't see that. Okay. Same thing with the blue zones. Okay. If you don't know what the blue zones are, look up the blue zones. Okay. Yes, it's true that it's underreported the amount of animal foods these blue zone populations actually eat. Most of them eat a lot of animal foods, is what I was trying to say. A lot of them eat a lot of animal foods. It's underreported how much animal foods these people are eating. Blue zone populations are eating a lot more meat than others. However, they also eat a lot of plant foods, a lot of fiber, and yet they're not dropping dead. They're some of the longest lived people on the planet. So again, fiber and plant foods aren't deadly. It's just that they're not necessarily a cause of better health. The best thing you can do for your health based on these studies is remove the refined foods, okay? Refined foods are the major reason why we see these things in these studies. It's obviously not the fiber causing these health benefits, because if it was, we would see it in these isolated fiber supplement studies. We would see that if we give isolated fiber supplements to people, they would have noticeable, measurable benefits in their blood markers, but we don't see that. So if you are going to eat carbohydrates, you should probably eat whole food carbohydrates. That way, because the fiber and the whole food complex in these foods improve the way your body handles blood sugar and metabolizes it, and it can blunt the insulin response and the potential, glycemic response of these foods. So if you're going to eat sugar, eat apples, eat bananas, eat grapes, you know what I mean? Eat tubers, eat potatoes, eat sweet potatoes, whatever, provided you don't have an intolerance to these foods or the fiber that they contain. If you're going to eat grains, try to eat the fibrous grains. Now, people like myself who have trouble with like whole grains, if I'm going to eat rice or starch, I might have to eat potatoes without the skins or jasmine white rice. I can't eat the brown rice because it triggers my digestive and autoimmune illness. So I'm just saying it's more nuanced than just saying fiber is good, you better eat it or you'll die of like heart disease or, whatever. And it's more nuanced and complicated than just saying fiber is bad. It will cause everyone to have intestinal problems and blah, blah, blah. It's just that fiber doesn't necessarily cause health benefits per se. And in some cases, for some people, it can contribute to negative health, digestive problems and autoimmune disease. But just, you got to find what works for you and not obsess over fiber intake, okay? So yeah, a lot of people with intestinal problems, they develop, like irritable bowel syndrome, colitis, Crohn's, diverticulitis. They're commonly in clinic told to eat a low residue diet, like when they go to a doctor. People with IBS and Crohn's, etc., especially if you're going to get intestinal surgery, they're commonly successfully, their symptoms can be managed by eating a low residue diet. That's a low fiber diet, okay? You'll see a substantial improvement in symptoms with that case. So this is known in mainstream medicine, right? It's just that we have this dogma surrounding fiber intake where we think fiber is magical and increases our benefits, and we think that we need fiber to poop. But the fact is, it's really not the case. And we tell these people who are already sick with digestive problems to remove the fiber because they notice, oh, shoot, my intestine doesn't bleed if you have colitis anymore if you remove the fiber. This is also why a lot of these like carnivore diet people or even the repeat communities, and even raw vegan people, okay? I don't think anyone needs to eat any of these extreme diets, but you will hear a lot of the reasons why people follow these extreme diets, like raw vegan, carnivore, paleo, etc. They experience healing of their autoimmune disease and their digestive problems because they're removing some of these fibers that are harder to digest. The thing that paleo, raw vegan, and carnivore communities all have in common is they're all removing beans, nuts, and seeds, and whole grains, with the exception of nuts and seeds and paleo dieters. But for some people, removing broccoli and kale and spinach and those other fibrous foods are even important. And we have this thing called FODMAPs. The FODMAPs diet is something that some doctors and clinicians and dietitians use to resolve digestive illness. What are FODMAPs? They're just types of carbohydrates or types of fiber that can trigger problems for some people. Irregular fermentation in the intestine and stuff. So yeah, we have hundreds of thousands of anecdotes of how low fiber diets can completely resolve people's autoimmune and digestive disease. We have clinical usage of low residue diets for people with intestinal diseases. And we have the FODMAPs protocol and autoimmune protocols that are used by clinicians all the time, including elimination diets. Very commonly used in medical practice, unless these people are just trying to milk surgery money and pharmaceutical money from you, in which case they won't even tell you of these natural solutions that have been used for hundreds of years in clinical practice. So the physiology of fiber, right? Sodium, magnesium, potassium, and fat intake are a lot more effective things to focus on to promote regular bowel functions and fiber. If you eat a tablespoon of coconut oil, that will likely cause a severe laxative effect where you just shit your intestines out, okay? Increasing your fat intake basically increases the fatty acids and the lubrication in your intestine, which helps you pass poop a lot easier, okay? Sodium, magnesium, and potassium increases the hydration in the intestine. A lot of people, what they find is sodium intake in particular. When you increase your salt intake, you notice your intestine moves a lot easier. However, if you don't eat a lot of fiber, there's nothing that you can really do to increase your bowel frequency or volume. You have to understand, more fiber intake means more poop. You're literally going to be more full of shit. So, whether you believe fiber's good or not, you need to understand, just because you're not pooping a lot doesn't mean you're constipated. If you're not pooping a lot and you're also eating relatively low fiber, it just means you're giving your intestine less undigested crap to poop out. So it's not necessarily a problem, okay? But if you do feel like you need to poop more, okay, try increasing your magnesium and sodium intake in particular. Himalayan salt, about a half a teaspoon, with about 200 to 400 milligrams of magnesium, and then maybe 700 milligrams of potassium from new salt. That's a really good way to get electrolytes without spending an arm and a leg for some stupid gimmick product. And it'll increase your relaxation and your sleep, regulate your blood pressure. Believe it or not, a little bit of sodium will help. And you'll also see a regulation of your bowel function. A lot of people find if they remove fiber, they'll actually see improvements in constipation, actually. Because a lot of times, higher fiber diets can actually cause constipation. So, in a nutshell, cramping, bloating, and feeling extremely full in the intestine is an indication of an issue, okay? Remember, meat is entirely digested in the stomach, and fiber is fermented by bacteria in the intestine. We know this from studies where they remove the intestine, okay, or intestinal surgery in the hospital setting, and you actually get to see food move through the intestine before it's the colon. And you'll see people who eat meat, it's turned into what we call chyme or whatever, like liquid basically. It's pulverized into mush from stomach acid and the pepsin enzyme in our stomach. So meat is neutralized. Animal proteins are neutralized before they hit the intestine. And then they're absorbed before they ever hit the colon. So if you eat meat, you don't really need to poop it out. There's not a lot of leftover residue. It's almost entirely digested and absorbed. Whereas fiber, on the other hand, passes through the stomach the same way it came down the throat after you chew it. And it's basically undigested until bacteria ferments it in your intestine. And that fermentation causes gas and bloating and farting. That's what farting and gas is fermentation. This explains why people who have these digestive illness and things get better when they remove fiber or they reduce it. Because you're basically making it a lot easier for your intestine to, by reducing the digestive load. Meat, whether you eat meat or not, has nothing to do with the difficulty in your intestine. It's mostly how much undigested food you're giving the bacteria in your intestine to ferment. So, yeah, more fiber means more undigested bulk, and more undigested bulk means higher volume and higher frequency of needing to poop. Gas and bloating is a byproduct of bacteria fermenting fiber in the intestine. Eating no fiber means no fermentation, which means no gas and bloating. So when people wonder why the hell I just only eat meat and sometimes fruit, it's because I literally never fart. I have no stomach cramps or pain. The last time I had stomach cramps or pain was when I tried to eat like potatoes with the skin on. But back in the day when I had a plant-based diet, I always had stomach pain and cramps, and it brought me to my knees. It felt like I was being stabbed from the inside. It was terrible. I don't get stomach pains or anything like that as long as I eat mostly meat and fruit, right? And I mostly only eat fruit these days, honestly, because sometimes certain fruit can mess with me too. But I have no gas, no bloating. I have no constipation problems. But I'm not scared of eating salt like most people are. I'm not scared of eating fat like most people are. So, yeah, in conclusion, fiber's not necessary. It also doesn't have any magical properties for your health. Even the gut microbiome is a very highly complicated science that is mostly correlational. There's really no microbiome science that proves we need to eat more fiber or anything like that, or prebiotics or probiotics. Most gut microbiome stuff is geared towards selling you supplements of various kinds, or books or protocols that involve eating a shit ton of weird fibrous foods and stuff. I'm telling you right now, your life is going to be so much easier. Your health is going to be better. Your health is going to be easier. And this nutrition stuff is going to be a lot easier. If you stop focusing on the hypothetical, I should do this or I should do that, and instead focus on health outcome research and what happens when I do certain things, and just simplifying it overall and doing what's best for the symptoms you're experiencing rather than the hypotheticals and the diagnosis and this and that. If you have any questions, leave them down below or ask me through DMs on Instagram, or if you know me in person, talk to me in person, ask me about it. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of more things to kind of talk about here. This is one aspect of this, okay? And many things about fiber I didn't finish up talking about here in this video. Any more questions or comments, let me know in the comments, or whatever. Ask me, and I'll be happy to kind of talk about it, If you think I'm missing something or you have another concern I didn't address here, talk to me about it. Ask me a question, okay? I guarantee you this stuff sounds quacky. It sounds crazy just because it's completely different than what everyone else tells you. Just because everyone believes that something is mandatory for health or whatever, just because everyone else believes something is true, it doesn't mean that what they think is true is effective or true. It doesn't mean that it's accurate just because everyone else believes it. Most people have health problems that these mainstream ideas do not solve. And I think that it's directly because most mainstream health advice is just flat out wrong. It's missing a lot of information. It's inaccurate. And the sooner that we start to ask these questions and talk about these crazy tinfoil hat things that seem crazy, the sooner that we can actually see more people being healthy, okay? All right. Thanks, y'all. Subscribe if you haven't already.